Tech Tuesday. We're going to be talking about evidence-based information resources today with Andy Hickner, who's our education and outreach librarian. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Just before we begin, I am recording today's session, and I'll be sending you all a link to this video. So if you want to go back and review anything, you're perfectly able to do so. I'll be emailing that to everybody on the call today, as well as some helpful links that Andy's provided me so that you can review everything we discussed today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. And I'll be helping Andy answer any questions that you might have as we go through today's session. So without further ado, Andy, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa. Just to confirm, are my slides being shared right now?
Yes, I can see them.
Great. Okay. I had to turn off my video because I was getting a little error about my connection. So thanks for joining, everybody. First things first, we're going to have a few live polls today on your phone or from your computer. Take a minute to go to pollev.com/Andy Hickner and put that in the chat. Just in case anybody wants it. Feel free to click that link in the chat. So today we are first going to describe some criteria for evaluating evidence-based information resources. We'll locate evidence using 3 different resources, and we'll compare the strengths and limitations of these resources. We're going to start out with a couple of live polls, followed by a brief refresher on evidence-based practice. We'll work through a patient case together as an example and come up with a clinical question for that scenario. Then we'll switch to live demo, searching for evidence to answer a question in 3 different resources. And we'll allow plenty of time to take your questions and let each of you share the perspective and expertise that you've gained from your own experience caring for patients. All right, poll number 1. So take a minute, and this will just help me understand kind of what the audience is like today. The breakdown is. So we have a lot of non-clinicians, which should be interesting. Nice to see that there are some students. I know that some of you, that at least the med students get some evidence-based practice in the curriculum, but I don't think you necessarily get as much time or practice as maybe we would like, just because of the time pressure in the curriculum. So hopefully this will be a nice refresher for all of you. All right, I'm gonna move on. Next question. What's your favorite resource for answering clinical questions and why? And this is an open answer question, so feel free to take a minute. Google, yep, Google is definitely the fastest. It's not one of the resources we're looking at today. Asking an expert, okay. Pubmed is another obvious one. UpToDate, yep, we'll be looking at that today. We'll be looking at both Pubmed and UpToDate. So as you know, UpToDate is particularly quick and efficient when you're looking at answers to questions. All right, and I'm going to move on to our next question. So in your opinion, what criteria do you think makes a resource evidence-based? Okay, based on facts, that's a good start. Scientific facts. Facts as opposed to, for example, opinion. Peer-reviewed, has there been a peer-reviewed publication with the finding? Is there data to support the recommendation? Surya notes based on cohorts of cases. So cohort design does make a lot of sense, particularly for studies about risk and exposure and harm. Is there a systematic review on the question? Is it based on guidelines? Okay, all these are really good. I'm going to close this. And so you probably remember the evidence pyramid from when you were a student. At the top of the pyramid are summaries. What's an example of a resource that's a summary? Feel free to post that in the chat. What kind of resource is a summary? Okay, so an example of a summary would be UpToDate or Dynamite. Next, the next rung on the pyramid is pre-appraised research. Anybody want to offer an example of pre-appraised research? A source that has pre-appraised research? So one example that we're going to look at today is, yes, very good, Carrie. The Cochrane Library, which we're actually in our live demos. And then at the bottom of the pyramid is non-pre-appraised research. What's an example of a resource that would have non-pre-appraised research? Anybody want to guess? So the example that we're going to be looking at today is Pubmed. So when you need to look up the answer to a question, where do you start? Which part of the pyramid do you start at? Are we starting at the bottom? Are we starting at the top? This is a shy group today. So the answer is we start at the top of the pyramid and we work our way down until we find the answer. So one thing that's problematic about this version of the pyramid is that the top lumps together summaries and guidelines. So guidelines can be useful. However, there is a wide range among guidelines in terms of how evidence-based they are. There are criteria available to help you evaluate the strength of a recommendation in a guideline. We don't have time to go into that today, but if people are interested in getting some recommendations, we might be able to get to that in the Q&A. Likewise, there's also a lot of variation in the quality of systematic reviews. Unfortunately, there are a lot of journals that will publish a review that markets itself as a systematic review, but that if you actually start looking at the methods, it's not really that systematically conducted. So unfortunately, you usually have to critically appraise those two. And so both of these, the screenshots from both of these slides are from the User's Guide to the Medical Literature, which is a great resource some of you may be familiar with. And we have access to it as an ebook. You can search for it in the catalog, and I'll show that when we are closer to the end, when we're doing the wrap up. This table shows some selection criteria for evaluating EBM resources. So going back to our poll question about how do you evaluate whether a resource is evidence-based? So feel free to jot these down and keep them in mind as we move on to the demos. First, just going off the first criterion, the basis of the current best evidence. Look for citations. Is the process for updating the resource transparent? Do they explicitly describe the process for gathering and synthesis? Is their assessment of the quality of the evidence? Do they indicate the strength of a recommendation? Coverage, of course, matters. A resource might be evidence-based, but its usefulness will also depend on how much it covers topics that are relevant to your specialty. And their colleagues at the Wood Library do their best to ensure that you have access to the information that you need. But we do have to be selective about what journals and databases we license, which means we can't license every evidence-based resource on the market. For those of you who are trainees, you may eventually end up at an institution with a different set of resources. The concepts that we're reviewing today will help you navigate those. good comment from Dr. Bussell. Sometimes the better the evidence, the less it can say, and that makes it more limited. Yeah, and that's something you actually find a lot in the Cochrane Library. They'll do a very exhaustive review of the evidence, and sometimes they'll say, you know what, the evidence just isn't very good. It's limited, so we can't make really strong recommendations. So you can only get so far with the evidence because we have to work with what exists, but not necessarily. We don't necessarily have answers, all the answers that we would want. So an example of a resource that does a great job of making its process transparent and consistent is the point of care tool Dynamed. Every step of the Dynamed process, including its criteria for grading the strength of its recommendations, is consistently and systematically identified, selected, summarized, synthesized, and interpreted. All right, now we're going to move on to a little vignette. Again, feel free to jot these details down. And actually, let me see if I can I'm able to post this into the chat. I don't think I can do that. Okay, so you're seeing a 65-year-old woman, Linda Garcia, who has she's 65, she has a number of comorbidities, including stage 3 chronic kidney disease and high cholesterol, and she has a family history of cardiovascular events. So Ms. Garcia seems like she could benefit from taking a statin. She's not sure though, because of her kidney disease. So let's work through a PICO question. Feel free to use the chat. How would you define our patient or our population here? Anybody want to take a crack at this? What's our population? All right, this is a patient with chronic kidney disease, specifically stage 3 chronic kidney disease. This is important. Stage 3 chronic kidney disease patients have not yet reached kidney failure, so they don't require dialysis yet. What's our intervention? Again, feel free to use the chat. So our intervention is going to be statins. Thank you, Carrie. Do we have a comparison? So in this case, we don't have an explicit comparison. And what's our outcome? What's the outcome we're interested in? Oh, so a comparison, Dr. Bussell, notes could be aspirin as opposed to statins. Okay, so thank you, Eva. Yeah, it would be preventing cardiovascular events as our outcome. So based on that, I'll pause for a minute if anybody has questions so far. Okay, if any come up, I'm going to switch to live demo now. I'm going to exit our slides for the rest of the class and hop onto my web browser. Let's see. Okay. And we're going to jump into live demos of each of these tools. Okay, so the first resource that we're going to take a look at is UpToDate. When I'm evaluating an evidence-based summary, as I mentioned earlier, one thing I try to evaluate is how transparent the recommendations are. Just going to open up our link to our Dynamed process, and I'm going to also pop that in the chat. Just open it on your own computers. So in my opinion, the Dynamed editorial process is fairly transparent about its process. So as I'm searching up to date, I'm going to be keeping an eye out for this kind of detail about process. Okay, so let's start out with an activity and try searching our question in up to date. And the link to up to date, or you can reach it from the library homepage. It's linked under popular resources. You may be used to getting to it from Epic. And again, our question is in patients with, and I'm just going to type this in, stage 3 chronic kidney disease, statins effective vascular. Having that in the chapter reference. So why don't we take 1 minute to try the search individually in up to date. Feel free to do this on your own. And then when you think you found the answer, raise your hand using the raise hand feature. And once I have a few people who've raised their hands, we'll regroup and take a look. Okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. All right, about 10 more seconds. All right. So we did get at least one volunteer who kindly raised his hand. For anybody who managed to find an answer, could you share in the chat? Oh, yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Raised hand is under reactions on your Zoom toolbar. Did anybody manage to find an answer? And if so, post in the chat what the title of the topic is, whether it's recommended, and what evidence is cited. Feel free to copy paste. Okay, while you're doing that, I'm just going to start out by doing my own search. So I'm going to do statins, chronic, keep it simple. And it auto suggests. And I think the topic I want is going to be right here, our first result. It's one of the things we like about Up to Date. We get our answers really fast. And once I'm in the topic, I'm going to skip to the treatment section. Oh, all right. Thank you, Dr. Vogler. So I'm just going to take a sec to see what you've shared. Significance is not clear. Association between high cholesterol and coronary risk tends to diminish. Oh, okay, so Andre found it in a different topic, statins, action, side effects, and administration. Okay. So as we're seeing, we can find similar information in multiple topics. So if we didn't find what we were wanting in this one, we could go back and the second result also has some information that might be useful. Back in this topic, I'm going to skip down to the treatment section, and specifically, I'm going to jump to a section called, so the subsection for primary prevention, which is CKD patients without established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and then the section called Our Approach. This is something that you see a lot in UpToDate. So what do you notice about the phrasing in this section? Is it evidence, or does it seem like expert opinion? So the words that caught my eye when I read this are some UpToDate authors and editors recommend, and then other UpToDate contributors recommend. So to me, that's a signal that what I'm reading here is expert opinion. And that's something that you get a lot of in UpToDate. There is evidence, but it's also paired with expert opinion. There's a physician I know who describes UpToDate as like finding the person at your hospital who knows the most about a condition and asking them the question. In the rationale for our approach, this section is where we're going to find references to the literature. So these results are supported by CKD subgroups from large statin trials for cardiovascular prevention, and then it cites 4 different statin trials. Some of these meta-analyses also included the SHARP trial. So the bottom line from UpToDate is that they do recommend statin therapy for patients with non-dialysis CKD who have established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And that, you can find that obviously up in the summary and recommendations, which is nicely bookmarked up here. So the big takeaways for UpToDate is, number one, as you're looking up stuff, we want to distinguish between expert opinion versus evidence. Focus on the evidence. I mean that it's nice to have the expert opinion, but it's not the same as evidence. The second is to look for references, and if possible, try to do a little critical appraisal of them. Actually click through to the references in Pubmed and look at the abstract. Even better yet, navigate to the full text and look at the full text of the article. So Vanessa, I think we are ready for our first Zoom poll, or is that something that I should administer?
No, I can do it right now.
Okay.
All right, everyone, you should be seeing a poll on your screen right about now. Andy, let me know when you want me to.
I think it's taking people, I think people probably need like a little bit more time just to get through all the questions, but it also looks like our votes have kind of plateaued. So
Okay.
go ahead and close it. All right. For poll question number 1, which category is up to date? So about 50% of you got this correct. Up to date would be considered a summary. It does it's a summary that incorporates pre-appraised research as well as non-pre-appraised research, but for our purposes, we're going to think about this as a summary. So top of the evidence period. And for the next two, we haven't looked at these resources yet, but we'll go into this a little further for each of these. So number two, Cochrane, specifically the database of systematic reviews, we would consider that pre-appraised research because they're high quality systematic reviews. And then number three, for PubMed, the correct answer is non-pre-appraised research. Because PubMed is just a collection of articles. They may have gone through peer review, but they haven't gone through full critical appraisal the same way that trials included in a Cochrane review would, for example. Thank you, Vanessa.
No problem.
To exit out of this, and we are going to move on to our next tool, which is the Cochrane Library. So we can get to the Cochrane Library from under popular e-resources. Open that up and close some of these tabs. So Cochrane reviews are the highest quality systematic reviews. They're methodologically very rigorous. They critically appraise all the included studies so that you don't have to. They can take a long time to produce an update. So if a review is more than a few years old, it's not a bad idea to check in PubMed to see if there's been a more recent study. All right, so I'm just going to do a quick search using our keywords. Again, keeping it pretty simple. One thing to keep in mind is that you do have to adjust your search strategy according to the resource you're using. So for example, this search strategy would probably be too broad for PubMed because there are millions and millions of studies in PubMed. My search retrieves 3 Cochrane reviews. The key thing to remember at this point is that stage 3 chronic kidney disease patients do not yet require dialysis. So I can skip over this first review. Second review is about chronic kidney disease patients who don't require dialysis. So let's click that one. Cochrane reviews have a ton of detail and are very transparent. So you should be able to conduct any critical appraisal of the review by clicking View PDF to navigate to the full text. Since our time today is short, we'll just look at the abstract. But keep in mind that the abstract almost never gives you enough information to critically appraise a study. You really have to read the full text. I am going to scroll down to the Cochrane's being a little slow today. So they have this really nice implications for practice section. And what they found is pretty conclusive evidence that statins are effective in CKD patients who aren't on dialysis. So again, this sort of reinforces what we already found up to date. So another thing that Cochrane offers, this might be a little hard to get to actually. Oh, the plain language summary. Cochrane often offers a plain language summary, which gives us some sample patient-centered language that we can share with Ms. Garcia. This helps us close the loop with the patient and explain the evidence to her using plain language as opposed to medical jargon. So that's the Cochrane Library. And our, let's see, we are 15 minutes left, so I'm going to move straight to PubMed next. And let's see. So as we found in the poll, PubMed is a non-pre-appraised resource, but it does have features that can help you locate pre-appraised research. We're going to look today at 2 techniques for finding evidence in PubMed. So I'm going to start out with my query, which you'll notice is a little bit longer than what I used in the other 2 resources. I've added our outcome cardiovascular events. Search. And actually, you know what, to take a minute and answer the question from Dr. Vogler, who sponsors the writing of Cochrane Reviews. So the Cochrane Reviews are sponsored by the Cochrane Collaboration, which is a global network of reviewers. So these are physicians, librarians, biostatisticians. It's a global network, and they're specialists in the field. And the Cochrane Collaboration is sort of like the central office that organizes the whole thing. And I believe the Cochrane Collaboration is based out of the UK, which is where it was originally founded. Great question, thank you. So what is one thing that you notice that's different from our Cochrane results? How much are we getting in a PubMed search compared to Cochrane? So we have 430 results compared to 3 results when we did more or less the same search in Cochrane. So this is where filters come in handy. And our publication type filters in particular, all of our filters are on the left-hand side here. It's kind of like if you were shopping on Amazon or something. So I can use my article type filters. I'm gonna select the systematic review and meta-analysis filters. Okay, that gets us down to 38. I think this is still way too many results. So I'm going to use the date limit to see what's been published since 2014, which is the date of that Cochrane review. Pull that slider over to 2014. There's still a lot of results. So I'm also wondering, like, where is that Cochrane review? And I happen to know I think the author's last name is Palmer. So our Cochrane review from 2014, sort of the gold standard that we have, is all the way down at number 10. So you kind of have to wade through all these other systematic reviews, which may or may not be as relevant or high quality to really get to the good stuff. Unfortunately, as I noted before, there are a lot of not great quality reviews that get published and indexed as systematic reviews in PubMed. Very few are of the same quality as a Cochrane review, so you do have to critically appraise anything you find in PubMed, which adds some time and effort on your part. All right. Chat. Why did I skip the first article, which is the only one with, I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand the question. The second technique that we'll take a look at for finding evidence in PubMed is clinical queries. So to get to clinical queries, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear up my filters here because otherwise those filters will carry through in future searches, and I don't necessarily want that. So I'll take a minute, clear my filters. I will flip back to home. And so the second technique we're going to look at is called clinical queries. And clinical queries is a way to capture study designs that are appropriate. PubMed homepage under Find, it's the second link, clinical queries. And it's best to use, actually, let's just use the same set of keywords. Nope, I don't want to take a survey. So I've entered my query, and then I can pick my clinical study category. This, of course, is going to be a therapy question. And let's stick with broad. We can either do broad or narrow. Broad will get us more results, narrow will get us fewer. And I'll click search. My results are down here. And I'll click see all to get to the full list of results. So again, this gets us like almost 340 results. I'm gonna go back and use the same filters that I had before. Systematic review, meta-analysis, and that date limit. Study is published since 2014. So again, we still end up with about 20 results, which is a lot to sift through and appraise when you're seeing a patient. One limitation of PubMed filters to be aware of is that the records in Medline, which is the source of most of PubMed's metadata, are indexed by humans, which make it more useful than databases that aren't human indexed, like Google Scholar. However, there is a time lag in indexing. So if you use filters, you might not always capture the most recent articles that aren't fully indexed. So for example, if you use the systematic review filter, it might not retrieve a systematic review published earlier this year because it hasn't been fully indexed yet. So our takeaways for PubMed: number one, beware of satisficing. As we saw, the best evidence isn't always in the first 10 results. Certainly isn't always the first result. Second, take advantage of the filters, but keep in mind that very new studies, you risk missing those because of the delay in indexing. And the third takeaway is that not all systematic reviews are equal in terms of quality. You still have to critically appraise anything that you find in PubMed. All right, I am doing terrible on time, so I am going to jump into our wrap up. So one of the helpful resources that I mentioned earlier is the user's guides to the medical literature. And you can find that by searching our catalog. And then moving to books. And then clicking through to the ebook. Chapter 4 of the user's guide gives kind of a deeper dive into the concepts that I've reviewed today. A second helpful resource for you is the Clinical Library Service. The Clinical Medical Library Service provides all of you with information support and help with both clinical research and patient care questions. Our librarians will round with you, do morning report, all kinds of other things. So if that's something that you're interested in taking advantage of, we do have one of our clinical medical librarians joining us today, Carrie Jedlicka. Thanks for joining, Carrie. I'm not going to like put you on the spot or anything, but if there's anything that you want to add in the chat about the CML service, feel free. If you have just general questions to help you find evidence or related to care of a patient, feel free to submit a reference question on the right-hand side of our homepage, and we will get back to you usually within the same business day or the next business day. Finally, for those of you who may be students, we have a set of modules in Canvas about EBM. I'm going to take this link and pop it in the chat. If you're interested in being added to those Canvas modules, just click that link in the chat and provide your seaweed, and I'll follow up and add you to the modules. Just gives a little more interactivity. Carrie notes that if anybody wants to learn more about the CML service and is maybe interested in taking advantage of it, you can email her, and her email address is in the chat. Thanks, Carrie.
I'll make sure to add this to the follow-up email as well, just in case anybody's interested.
Thanks, Vanessa. And then the last link that I want to share is to our class feedback form. I ask that you take 1 minute before you leave today to just fill out the form and let us know how I can improve this class the next time I offer it. It's really important, and it only takes a minute. I have done a really terrible job of taking questions from everybody. So about 5 minutes. If anyone has questions, or if you disagree with something that I said, because you're kind of getting my take on evidence-based practice, and I'm not taking care of patients every day. What I've done, I'm approaching it more from like the librarian end. So I think everybody who's here today probably has their own suggestions and tips and best practices. Feel free to share that with each other in the chat. So while we're waiting for questions, if you can answer in the chat, I'd love to hear one thing that you learned today that you plan to incorporate into your patient care. Okay, feel free to just put that in the chat. One thing that you learned today that you'll incorporate into your patient care. I'll scroll up and just make sure I haven't missed any other questions. Okay, I don't, oh, filters in Pubmed, okay. Dr. Vogler, would you, oh, yeah, thank you. So I appreciate that. Yeah, use those filters. Definitely recommend User's Guide to the Medical Literature. It's a very foundational textbook on the topic. And it's good for other facets of the EBM process, such as critical appraisal. Using the date filter in Pubmed, and how to access Cochrane. All right, Vanessa, while we're waiting for any last questions, and do you have any final remarks for everybody?
No, just a reminder in case anybody signed in a little later, that at the end of the day, I'll be sending an email out with some links that Andy's discussed today, as well as the recording of the video. If you don't have questions now, but end up having them later on, you just think of something. When you get that email, I will be copying Andy. So, feel free to, send any questions via email as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take any follow-up questions.
But it looks like we're not getting any questions, and a few people are dropping off. So, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say thank you, Vanessa, and thanks everybody who joined today.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.